What is the most essential input when it comes to esports performance, or even in general? The answer is energy. Without energy, we can't do a single thing. We would simply not exist. We require energy for all of our systems to work, to function, and for us to do tasks. But in the context of esports, energy is a bit more specific in terms of what it fuels. And what it fuels that's important to us is our focus, because our ability to consciously and subconsciously apply attention to tasks is absolutely essential when it comes to how cognitively demanding something like esports is, because it is extraordinarily complex in terms of how many tasks we have to juggle all at once, how many things we have to hold into our mind. And so we have to have this big tank full of energy, because you can kind of split the tank up of energy into all of these different slices that are all of these different tasks. And if you don't have enough energy that covers all of the tasks, well, then some are going to drop off, and you're always going to be in a spot where it's going to be very difficult to perform optimally. So the more energy that we have available, the more we can focus for longer at higher quality. So let's go through some of the bullets here as to how important this actually is. When we are trying to learn, our learning is greatly improved by having more energy, because having more energy allows us to apply what we need in terms of attention to the focus of the habit or behavior or skill that we are trying to improve or to correct. You know, we've done some effort in terms of analysis and figuring out what we need to work on. And when it comes to learning anything, it requires that intentional use of energy. And so if we are able to have that at our disposal, we're going to be able to juggle all of these tasks that are automated. We're going to be able to spend energy on reading the game and what's going on in our environment that allows us to do sort of the calculus that we need to understand what to do. And then in addition to that, we're going to have enough energy left over to apply consistent focuses of what we're trying to intentionally correct. And one thing that's important here conceptually is that the brain is very, very much in the mode always of energy conservation. When we automate habits and behaviors, we're trying to program things to, when we're trying to become better players, we're actually trying to program ourselves to respond automatically to certain stimulus, not just because it makes us quicker, but actually it makes us way more energy efficient. It makes us able to actually have and hold much more information in our brains that allows us to have even better game sense, to become even better players. So becoming super energy efficient in our tasks is really important. And the way the brain does that is by automating them. But once something's automated, it requires quite a lot of energy to change that, because the brain doesn't want to change something that's already automated, because that costs energy. It doesn't want to do that. It's the same thing as to why it's very resistant, the body, to putting on muscle mass. Because if we are to add metabolically active tissue, we are increasing the energy demand, the calorie demand. So that's a survival risk, and we don't want that. And so we're always having to fight for the changes. We always have to make the case and make an argument. And in this particular instance, with this context, we are using that energy bandwidth to apply to intentional corrections. And that's going to have a higher energy demand. So we want to have a lot of energy so that we're able to put the focus in all of these different places. And this will help us to have improved learning outcomes. Better discipline is also another one, because one of these slices or many slices of things that needs to be in our energy, I suppose, allocation is all of these fundamentals that we have decided we need, and all of these rules that we are trying to apply to ourselves to become consistent players. We know, for example, that we're not supposed to chase this kill. We're not supposed to overpeak here. We're not supposed to be, making these types of decisions. We know that we have certain rules. And the thing is that sometimes these decisions are very juicy, because there's, get the dopamine hit. Let's be aggressive. Let's have some fun. You got that little devil on your shoulder. And the problem is that when you are low energy, it's very hard for you to say no to that. Very hard for you to kind of offset the kind of dopamine that your body is trying to get there. And so discipline becomes a lot harder if you have less energy. And so that means it's harder to become a consistent player, because you'll be further ingraining habits that do not comply with your fundamentals. And then lastly, we've got mental endurance. Mental endurance is, of course, really important, because if you have a bigger tank, that means you can play for longer. That means higher quality practice for higher amounts of time, which means faster improvement. So that makes sense. But here's the crux of this. Something that's super important to remember is that it is a fuel tank. and you are expending that fuel over time as you use the fuel for tasks. That means energy is finite. And that means that you have to budget your energy and you have to understand what gives energy, what takes energy. But we'll get more into that later. But understand this, your energy is finite, and that's okay. It's okay that you eventually get too tired, and it's okay to recognize that. And then maybe you can make a decision to stop based on your goals. But we'll get into that. If you are in the performance space, you've probably seen the Yerkes-Dodson law bell curve because it's just been around for maybe the better part of a century. So it's old hat in the performance world, but it is great at showing us various things. Now, here we are going to scribble out arousal. We're just going to put a big old E for the physics fans, but this means energy, of course. And we're going to be thinking about this top of the bell curve as the optimal zone for energy for performance. We're going to be thinking about these sides as energy is too low, energy is too high. Energy is too low, we're disinterested, maybe we're depressed, maybe we just don't care. We just don't have the energy, man, and can't be bothered. Oh, don't care. Might as well re-peak, doesn't matter. You know, like we don't care. You don't have enough interest. No, not enough attention is available. And so this is a natural way to feel. And I'm sure a lot of you have felt that way in games. Like you're not energized enough, so you just don't care. And you're not going to perform well if you don't care because you just don't have, if you don't care, you don't have enough energy bandwidth to apply to all of the tasks. So why would you even care? You can't even do it. But you just don't kind of like consciously realize that a lot of the time when you're in that spot. When you're too energetic, you've had too much caffeine, you're overstimulated, maybe the environment has lots of pressure, so your nervous system's dialed up, the fight or flight system's kicking in, you're getting tilted, you're angry, you know, there's all sorts of ways you could be too high energy. It could be because of emotion, or it could be just your physiology, like we mentioned with the pressure, where it's not necessarily there's a trigger that's creating an anger, but maybe it's an external trigger. Like I mentioned, you're on stage and you've got these inherent expectations. So it's more of this like internal trigger that you have, and it triggers the emotions. And now you're gonna just going crazy. You've got all this adrenaline and all this noradrenaline all over the place, and you fall off this curve. Now you're going to have impaired performance because you get this kind of bleed of attention. Because what typically happens with emotion when you become emotional is that, or overly emotional, is that you get into a place where your executive systems start to shut down. So your ability to apply the bandwidth to the cognitive functions is impaired. You become more stupid. And so your ability to apply the energy into the places it needs to go is now heavily impaired, that system. And then in addition to that, you have like massive energy drains happening because now you've got a lot of attention that is naturally drawn to the thing that's frustrating you, to the thing that you're anxious about. Your intention's going all over the place. But what we know for great performances is that your attention is centralized in the high performance zone, and it only cares about the game. All of the attention bandwidth is going into the game. When you're in the zone, you're not thinking about anything else. You're just so dialed into the game, so focused on all of the little details and all the data in the game, and there's nothing else that's in your way. And that's the optimal place to perform from. So if your attention is going on to your opponents, and you're like trying to micromanage your teammates, you're upset with things, that is a key sign that you're not in an optimal performance zone. Energy and learning. So this is another one that's really, another model that's really familiar in the coaching or performance world, but something that's very helpful here as well. Because when you're trying to make these corrections, we talked about how it's quite demanding to make these corrections in terms of energy. But you know, we will eventually get there because everything's automated, and we look at our system, we're like, oh, okay, I'm reacting in an automated way to all of the stimulus in the game. But I found out that actually, yeah, I'm kind of shit. So I need to fix something. Okay, and then eventually you'll kind of figure out, hey, there's this thing that I realized that I need to fix. And so you go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. And you got to this incompetence because you've got the wrong analysis. So you ended up doing the wrong behavior. You didn't understand what to do initially. So after some time, you try to figure out, okay, well, what should I be doing? And you get to right analysis. And we're like, oh, yay, we're right analysis. We know what to do now. So now you're spending your time applying a pretty big chunk of bandwidth, energy bandwidth, attention bandwidth into conscious competence. Because now we have to figure out, okay, well, when am I in the spot where I have to make this change? What is the change that I have committed to make? Now I'm intentionally making this change. There's a lot of conscious bandwidth, energy that's going into this particular correction. And then over time, we eventually get to a point where it becomes ingrained. We've reprogrammed ourselves successfully. It's now become intuitive, and now it is unconsciously competent. We are unconsciously competent. And so that allows us to be in a place where now suddenly, like, what does this actually mean? It actually means that we are switching this task from high bandwidth to low bandwidth. And suddenly this is great, because what it means is we can start this whole process all over again with the next thing. And that really is how we iterate improvement in skill acquisition, or really in behavior correction, really anything that allows us to improve. It often goes through this process. And so it's very important to understand that with learning, it can be as slow as one focus at a time, but you can juggle focuses. But I think it's helpful to go through this whole energy presentation, because it will allow you, because a lot of people ask, how many things should I be focusing on at once? Well, really, you should be focusing on as many things as you can focus on. So this whole presentation, one of the goals is for you to be able to make that estimation yourself by understanding your energy. So energy and consistency. So this is another interesting one, because consistency, firstly, this is an illustration that is illustrating the inchworm concept, or the ABC game from Jared Tendler. So we have our ABC game here, as I draw these boxes in strange ways. So the idea here is that you have a performance range. So here's our performance range, which means that any given day, you could be anywhere in this range of A, B, and C. C being the worst, A being the best. Now, what we want to do is we want to have a really tight range between C and A. We don't want a really long range between C and A. Now, what tends to happen if we are not responsible with our energy usage, and we have too many tasks, we just don't have enough energy to manage all of the fundamentals that we need to be encouraging that improve us as players, our C game gets worse, because we keep continuing to make these same mistakes. We can't maintain the things that we have learned, and we can't maintain or make effective progress on the things we're trying to correct. And this really impacts the C game. Sometimes your A game will not move necessarily, like your ceiling won't get much worse, but your C game will. And so this will have the impact of creating much more distance between that and your A game, and that's a very frustrating reality for a lot of players. If you want to become more consistent, you have to train consistently in that good energy zone, so that you're learning effectively and you're maintaining your fundamentals. And something else about this system that I'll mention as we're here is that the idea here that Jared Tendler, if he was to work with you, would go through with you on, it's a very weird sentence, but here we go, is that we want to quantify each of these zones. So what are the, the tactical, what are the strategic, what are the mechanical, emotional, physiological patterns that you notice? So tactically, it might be that I'm over peaking. Emotionally, it's that I get anxious. It could be that I play greedily, or I play too risk averse. It could be that my mechanics are really bad, or which part of my mechanics. And as you start to really see the patterns in the C game, you now have things that you can, if you went back to this, we can be like, I found a pattern in my C game. I found a problem. I found the incompetence. And now I can do the right analysis, and I can start to do conscious competence. I'm actually now working on this thing. And so this is in the process of improving. And so that's what you want to be able to do. And so this is why I'm showing this to you guys, because when you're going through a process of improving, here's another look at, okay, not just how we do the skill improvement using this hierarchy of competency, but actually here's the big picture of how our performance range is actually moving. And here's the cost if we are failing in this regard. This is what's actually happening. So becoming a consistent player means having a stable base to practice from, to work on our weaknesses and our strengths efficiently. Okay, so now let's look at the givers and takers of energy. Because if we are to go out there and if we are to try to program ourselves and we're trying to figure out how do we do all of this, we need to understand what allows us to have more energy and what takes it away, so that we can start to underestimate those reserves. So things like exercise, obviously almost feels counterintuitive, but exercise, of course, it gives us energy, especially mental energy. It affects our mood as well. And mood is very important. Mood is like a filter. If you're more positive and accepting about things, you're more present, it's going to be that you're able to not get kind of stuck on certain things. So like if you get stuck on an idea, like, oh, that was unfair, versus I'm accepting, oh, that was unfair, I accept it and I move on. If you get stuck on that thing, you're spending some mental energy there. So that's just an example as to how mood can be a filter through which it is either energy efficient or energy inefficient. And so mood is actually very important as a default state that we might be in that's costing us energy or helping us to maintain or gain energy. And this is, by the way, why, gratitude practices, which I don't have here. There's lots of bullets here that I don't have that gives energy and takes energy. But stuff like gratitude and appreciation are very effective for mood, and because it helps create that positive energy filter. Nutrition is an obvious one, of course. You want to be well fueled, and you want to be sleeping well. You want to be socializing. Socializing is a really important one. Obviously, we're social creatures, and this work is best done in person. You'll find that just feels different than being on Discord with friends and having a laugh. But that is a good secondary, because ultimately, like, the socializing aspect is not just the result of just being in person with someone, because obviously there is like chemically things that are happening there. But it is also just being able to have a laugh, being able to kind of get into a different headspace, and there is something that is very helpful about that, even if it's not in person too. But socializing is a good one. Rest of all and many different forms can exist too, as givers of energy. And we could talk about things like non-sleep deep rest and meditation and taking a bath or whatever. We can talk about those things too. But ultimately, there's lots and lots of different things you can come up with that will give you energy. Then there are things that will take energy away from you. So sedentary lifestyle, again, it feels counterintuitive because you're not moving around, but I think what we're kind of seeing there is actually the adaptation of the body in a way. If we talk about before that the body's resistant, it wants to be conserving energy. What's going to happen if you're sedentary is that the body's going to be like, okay, great, I'm sedentary. How can I use less energy? But if you're exercising, your body's like, oh crap, I need more energy. So you're creating a larger reserve, a larger tank by exercising. And although exercising costs energy, you're building a bigger tank. Whereas with being sedentary, you're kind of limiting the tank and saying, hey, actually, can we limit it even more? Because we're actually not doing anything. So that's kind of one of the reasons why that becomes a taker of energy. Poor nutrition is an obvious one too. And this can also be something where, like, not just like eating crap food, but eating just too much food. Or it could be that you are eating late into the night and that's messing up your sleep. There's lots of ways that nutrition and eating can be problematic. Poor sleep, obviously, we know is a really, really big one. Sleep is hugely important for cognitive performance and just in general mood and everything. Like being able to, honestly, the list of things that sleep is critical to is basically everything. So I'm not going to even list everything. It's everything. It's like the most important thing. But everyone understands this. And we all have our own individual challenges. Then you've got relationship stress. But stress of any kind. It could be relationship stress. It could be like career stress. The boss is being a dick. It could be that you have exam stress. It could be all kinds of different stresses. This is very draining. Mental and physical exertion. Just doing stuff can be exerting, of course. And that's important to understand. And this kind of leads us into the designing a program slide, because when we're thinking about what costs energy, one of those things actually is playing. And, everyone has a different physiology, schedule, and daily experience. And so we absolutely must look at all the variables to design our own programs. I'm going to make a point here, because you could design a program and it could be that you're like, oh man, this program's not working out because I'm hella tired today, or something happened. And one of the reasons why we're going through this whole process of looking at some of these concepts is because what we want to do is we want to understand how to tackle this programming of ourselves as not as this rigid thing that has to be stuck to, but instead we want to look at it like we look at making a play as a player. If the scenario in the server changes because something unexpected happened and now the calculus is different, well, if you accept that the calculus is different, you look at the reality and now you do the new calculus and the new sums, so you get the new answers. Now you execute that. That's what you're supposed to do in the game. You're not supposed to be like, oh man, this sucks. I did all this work to have this plan, and now the things, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to do my plan anyway. Because this is the thing, right? We feel like we're almost treated unfairly sometimes, and that we'll just like do it anyway out of spite, because really what's happening there is we're just being unable to accept that something has changed and we have to put some more energy in, and then it can come out as an emotional problem. So I did, it's going a bit into the mental game there, but here is a similar situation. If the calculus changes because a life event happens, or you get into an argument with somebody, or you have a terrible night of sleep, we just have to know, okay, this is a new calculus. This is what the gas tank looks like today. This is how I feel today. Okay, how can I still get the best out of today? Because there is a best out of today that you can get. And so this is really the point I'm trying to drive home with this. So it might be the case that you need to practice significantly less on a given day to give appropriate recovery time or to avoid bad quality practice. This is really important because if we want to avoid just extending our C game forever and just not making learning actually happen, then we need to recognize that bad quality practice can truly be very detrimental, and we should genuinely try to avoid it at all costs. If our goal is to improve and become more consistent, bad quality practice is the #1 enemy. I'm just doing lots of lines here because I'm trying to emphasize, is it working? Is it working? Okay. So establishing goals. We already kind of talked a little bit about this, where basically the goals act as guardrails. Guardrails. What does that mean? That means that when we're in this system of building a program, we need to understand what we're protecting. That's why I wrote the word guardrails. Okay, are we protecting against bad quality practice? We want to avoid it at all costs. So we want to protect high quality practice. I'll just put a Q here. High quality practice. We want to protect maybe sleep. Maybe that's something you would decide. I want to optimize around sleep. It's really like, what do you want to optimize around? So you kind of pick some things that are important to you, and maybe it could be more specific things too, like, oh, okay, I really need to work on certain aspects of like my mechanics. So here's like, mechanics, or I need to be better at like VOD review. So you want to add that in. It can really be like any number of things, because we just are looking to understand, and this is something that you have to make the assessment on, right? If we like go all the way back to this, we're thinking about what are the things that you guys are choosing that you should be focusing on? Like, where should the focus go? Like, what are you consciously incompetent of, and what is it that you would select from the things that you are now consciously aware that you're incompetent about to improve? And so now you're starting to kind of pick some of these things, but you'll notice that I didn't just pick something that's, let's say, helping my direct performance in the game. I'm also picking something that's allowing me to have better quality practice, because up here we can see that high quality practice is obviously something I really care about. And so, VOD review is something that maybe we picked because we feel like we aren't as good as understanding the game. And so it's harder for us we noticed that it was harder for us to know what are the things that we should correct, or what is important. I don't know what's important. So maybe I need to do VOD review to find out how, what my weaknesses are, or to be inspired. So you guys really have to kind of pick what it is that is important to you. And then once you've done that, you can create some kind of a schedule. And so, one of the things that's important here is that if to do that, you need to find out something, which is how much time can you, what is the minimum dose of practice time? So for the training block, when you're actually playing the game, what's your minimum effective dose? Now, one way to find this out, and this is the way that I did it, was to just play for a week, every day for a week, for 5 days, and figure out, okay, when do I get tired? So what does tired mean? Well, tired means I don't have enough energy. Let's go all the way back here. So tired means I'm like getting down here. And so what are some of the signs here? So increasing attention and interest. Well, that's that description is when we're going up the curve. But if we're going down the curve, it looks like, loss of focus. Well, what does loss of focus mean? Well, attention is less, right? Or not feeling it. I'm not exactly sure what not feeling it will communicate to everybody, but essentially there is a feeling that you'll get used to. Okay, if you are consistently practicing from this place, over time, you'll become way more aware when you're in here or when you're in here, because you're spending the majority of your time in one place. So the contrast becomes clearer, and so it becomes a bit easier. But I'll give you guys another tip as to how you can kind of figure out if you are like down here. One of the things is because our gas tank is not full enough, we can't juggle enough of the tasks. What tends to happen is stuff like this. Oh my God, I know I shouldn't have done that. I never do that. Or maybe it's, oh my God, I can't believe I made that mistake. I know exactly that I'm not supposed to make that mistake. Or, man, I fixed that. I fixed that thing, and now I'm making that mistake again. So if you're seeing stuff that doesn't seem normal in that way, then you've probably hit that point when you just don't have the energy for the high quality practice. And now you're in a risk zone. You're in the risk zone of enforcing bad habits. And so it's very important to understand what is the minimum effective dose of practice time, where you are basically able to, or what is the kind of maximal amount of high quality practice time is another way to put it too. So for me, that's like the most important thing because of the reasons I've been talking about in this talk so far. And so one of the things that's a superpower from this, as I mentioned previously, is if you figure this out, you can then suddenly be like, oh, I don't need to practice anymore. I've hit my 4 hours. Because for me, it was like 4 to 6 hours was like the average. So if I like hit my 4 hours and I'm like, man, I'm seeing the signals that I'm tired, because maybe I'm like, oh man, I don't normally do that. Or, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Because I know what my standards are now. I know what my fundamentals are. And so if I see something like that, I'm like, okay, time to stop. And I just stop. And I feel totally great about it. Because even if it was only 4 hours, even if it was only 3 hours, I know that what I'm doing right now is protecting myself from making fundamental errors that will slow down my progress. So I'm actually taking the route that will make me improve more quickly by stopping. There's that extra hour, that extra 2 hours, the extra 3 hours is not going to save my career. It's actually going to worsen it. And so once we have a system like this in place, we understand this, it's way easier to stop. And then once you've stopped, you can be like, okay, how can I repurpose this time? Do I put it into recovery? Do I put it into, some of these other goals that I have, like some VOD review? Like, how else do I want to do this? And earlier, I also talked about sleep being important. Well, for me, using myself as an example, when I last took this whole process extremely seriously, I scheduled my entire day around all of this, around optimizing my performance. I would have a specific time of day that I would tend to practice. I would alternate some days where I would, depending on the day, depending on where I am with the gym and fatigue, I would sometimes maybe put gym in the middle of the practice block, if that made sense. And sometimes I would put it like just before the practice block. That was the most common place that it would be. And then I would, after the gym, I would then eat my lunch or whatever. And then kind of going into later afternoon, then that's when I would start playing for like my 4 to 6 hour block. And then after I would be done, I would be doing, the VOD review or like the technique work if I needed it, if I had extra time. But I also had a cap that I generally tended not to go over because I wanted to make sure that I had enough time to wind down for sleep. And then I would then pick activities that I felt like I could perform well at for the intended purpose. So whether that's learning, whether that's relaxation and recovery, whether that's intentionally making sure I'm in the best place to get the best night of sleep, that's what I would do. And so that could be an activity like reading. I know that screens aren't good. I know that, there are certain things that I shouldn't be doing that would overstimulate me, that would worsen my sleep outcome, which would worsen my capacity in the following day for training. And I would keep my food the same, at least in the first half of the day as well. My food would be very much the same because that's the energy that's going in before I practice. And so I always wanted to have a somewhat consistent sense as to what that looked like. I also wanted to have a meal that I felt comfortable with for game day as well. That felt exactly the same as practice days. So that is that's the extreme version of how that looks. You can build your entire schedule around it. But as days change, as life changes, you now have the understanding as to how to change with it so you can still get the best outcomes. So with all of that, I hope that this was an interesting and insightful presentation about a concept that I think is not really discussed, but I think is pretty relevant to esports performance when we're looking at it in its whole. Thanks for listening.